There are a lot of crises facing our world today, such as wars, natural disasters, and species extinction. Many of these disasters are a result of human-caused global warming. By burning fossil fuels, we are emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This causes the planet to warm, which creates dramatic changes in climate around the world. We've been witnessing the effects of global warming close to home as of recently. The town of Lytton, British Columbia, suffered at the hands of Canada's biggest heat wave in history. In the summer of 2021, Lytton broke the record for the highest temperature in Canada. Days after, a wildfire made its way into the town, burning every building it could to the ground and killing 2 people. This isn't the only example. The fire of Fort McMurray, Alberta, which in the process of destroying the city, forced 88,000 people to evacuate on the only highway out. These are just 2 examples of the drastic changes in climate, something that's going on around the world. In order to stop and reverse global warming, humans need to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. While this may be a long and expensive process, it's certainly worth avoiding the $9.9 billion cost of the Fort McMurray fire, and even more importantly, the cost of human life. One of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions is transportation. 28% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions come from this sector. That's a lot of different vehicles transporting a lot of different things. This is what makes finding the solution so difficult. For decades, governments, companies, and individuals have been developing technologies to reduce greenhouse gases in vehicles. Good morning. My name is Finnsson Cane-Osborne. In my presentation today, I'll be exploring the possibilities of zero-emission transportation now and in the future. There are many different solutions to this problem, but I'll be talking about some of the main options: hydrogen fuel cell cars, battery electric cars, hybrids, and public transportation. One of the most promising solutions to transportation's large carbon footprint is the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. It's a car, truck, or bus that runs entirely on hydrogen through a fuel cell. People may think that hydrogen is a dangerous flammable gas, but in fact, as a fuel, it's much safer than gasoline in a vehicle. There's a lot of very complex tech that makes it possible for hydrogen to be converted and utilized as electricity in a package small and light enough to work in a vehicle. Before diving into how each of the components of a fuel cell vehicle works, it's important to know the general system. In simple terms, a fuel cell vehicle works like a hybrid, but instead of a gas engine accompanying a battery, a fuel cell does. The gasoline tank in a hybrid plays a similar role to the hydrogen fuel tank in a fuel cell vehicle. The fuel cell is the device that converts the hydrogen gas into electricity that can either be sent to the battery or directly to the motor. If the vehicle is driving at a speed where very little power is needed, like while parking or in heavy traffic, the already charged battery sends power straight to the motor, conserving the hydrogen in the tank. As soon as the power draw becomes higher, like quickly accelerating from a green light, the hydrogen fuel cell kicks in and produces electricity that's sent directly to the motor, along with the power already being sent by the battery. Keep in mind that the battery never needs to be recharged manually, as the fuel cell is constantly keeping it topped up. You can think of a fuel cell as an additional battery. It keeps a constant flow of electricity as long as there's enough hydrogen fuel on board to be converted. Do that. Anyway, this is where things begin to get complicated. It's supposed to be a video there, but whatever. This is where things begin to get complicated. The core of a fuel cell vehicle. The fuel cell intakes hydrogen and air. Once inside the fuel cell, there are 2 electrodes, one negative, the anode, and one positive. Oh, that's weird. There we go. Positive, which is the cathode. But in between the 2 electrodes is an electrolyte. If you picture the anode on the left and the cathode on the right, hydrogen is supplied to the anode, with oxygen supplied to the cathode. The hydrogen latches onto the anode, where a catalyst separates the hydrogen molecules into protons and electrons. The electrons then travel to a circuit below the anode, where they can be transported either to the battery or directly to the motors. The leftover protons pass through the electrolyte and the cathode, where the oxygen is waiting. The protons from the hydrogen molecules then unite with oxygen, and when the used electrons come back into the cathode, all 3 is combined to create water. Once this process is completed, the water vapor is sent through the tailpipe. This means that a fuel cell vehicle doesn't emit any greenhouse gases. At the moment, there aren't many cars on the road that use fuel cell technology. The only 2 available to the general public in BC are the Toyota Mirai and the Hyundai Nexo. Both boast some pretty impressive range figures, but for a brand new technology, reasonable price tags. Where the fuel cell vehicle falls short is in the availability of fuel. It's not an issue of the fueling itself being inconvenient or especially costly, it's the lack of stations. Look at these maps of the Lower Mainland. On the right, the green dots represent charging stations for battery electric vehicles, and on the left, hydrogen refueling stations. Oh, my animations aren't working. These three, if you look close enough, you may be able to see them. These three stations are among only two others in the other stations in the whole country, one in Victoria and one in Quebec City. In order to expand the station network, there needs to be a reliable hydrogen source producing the fuel in an eco-friendly manner. There are a number of different ways of producing hydrogen. They're color-coded to reflect the method in which they're produced. The traditional method of producing hydrogen uses a process called steam reforming, in which a fossil fuel is used to produce hydrogen. Steam reforming produces black, brown, and gray hydrogen, which are the worst for the environment. These types are what dominate production at the moment and have for over 100 years. The main environmental issue with these methods is that CO2 and carbon monoxide is sent into the atmosphere. Gray hydrogen has a slightly lighter impact on the environment when compared to black and brown, as instead of coal, natural gas is used. This doesn't mean that producing gray hydrogen is sustainable at all, and there are still far too many greenhouse gases in the emissions in the air after the process is finished. These methods are used in order to keep production costs down, as fossil fuels are relatively inexpensive. Blue hydrogen still uses fossil fuels, but captures the carbon to lower emissions by up to 95%. Instead of letting these harmful gases escape into the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide are injected deep underground into saline rock formations, where carbon is contained under cap rock. While the process of creating blue hydrogen greatly reduces the carbon footprint, it isn't perfect, making blue hydrogen a good short-term solution, but not the complete fix. This doesn't mean that blue hydrogen doesn't have its place. It's an effective way to make hydrogen fuel a part of our infrastructure. It's a relatively easy process to convert processing plants that are currently producing black, brown, and gray hydrogen into infrastructure producing blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen is produced using an entirely different method. Instead of using steam reforming, green hydrogen is produced through a process called electrolysis. Renewable electrical power is used to split water into two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. The only emission of this electrolysis method is oxygen. This results in an entirely zero carbon production method from start to finish. Unfortunately, green hydrogen makes up only 0.1% of all hydrogen produced. This is partially attributed to the cost efficiency of gray hydrogen in particular. But as the cost of renewable energy continues to fall and the scarcity of gasoline and coal becomes more prevalent, green hydrogen should be in the perfect place for a transition. This expected growth is made even bigger as governments with massive energy and transportation sectors aggressively subsidize clean hydrogen production and usage. Hydrogen's biggest competitor, battery electric vehicles, outsell fuel cell vehicles massively. For reference, 4.7 million battery electric vehicles were sold in 2021, while hydrogen sales only reached just over 15,000. That means that every time a hydrogen car rolled off the lot, 303 battery electric vehicles followed it. The system behind the leading form of carbon-neutral transport is a relatively simple one when compared to a fuel cell. Instead of having two sources of electrical power, a battery electric vehicle only has one. You guessed it, a battery. Usually lithium-ion or lithium polymer, these batteries store electrical power from a combination of the power from the battery and small top-ups from regenerative braking. After this, the systems in a battery electric vehicle are very similar to a fuel cell vehicle. Just like in a fuel cell car, there are many different ways the electric motors can be arranged, depending on what the car is going to be used for. If the car is designed for efficiency, like most consumer EVs, it will only usually have one motor. In order to provide power to more than just one axle, the motor will be placed right under the drive shaft, with no need for transmission. Some other EVs do the same thing, but with two motors. The Nissan Leaf laid out the path for all affordable EVs you see on the road today. Some of the core technologies featured in modern EVs were first seen on the road in the Leaf. Given that it was the first mass-market EV, it needed some major development and innovation to work. The Leaf used lithium-ion batteries instead of the far less efficient nickel-metal hydride batteries that had been used in the earliest EVs. The positioning of the batteries was also changed. Instead of placing the batteries under the hood, Nissan developed flat batteries that were put on the other side of the car, stretching from axle to axle. This allowed the Leaf to be equipped with bigger and higher capacity lithium batteries. Using lithium-ion batteries and setting them up this way is common practice in EVs nowadays, but Nissan were the first to bring it to the mass market. The Leaf has always been the representative of affordable zero-emission cars, paving the way for hundreds of EVs that would be brought to market in the following decade. These innovations made it possible for the Leaf to become immensely popular among the general public, something never achieved by an EV up to that point. In the years following the Leaf's release, sales continued to increase, plateauing in 2014. These sales figures were never repeated, as more and more competition from recognizable manufacturers arose. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Tesla before. Hybrids Hybrids started the environmental revolution in the car industry, reaching massive success with the Toyota Prius from 2001 onwards. A hybrid system is a gas or diesel engine combined with an electric powertrain. Toyota has sold over 15 million Prius hybrids, making it the best-selling EV of all time. Most hybrids are parallel hybrids, which means that the internal combustion engine and the electric motor are separate from one another, meaning that both can power the wheels either separately or in unison. The onboard computer decides which part does what, depending on how much power is needed and the battery charge, among other factors. At low speed, when the power demand is also low, the computer will decide to have the electric motors handle power delivery. When the speed or power demand becomes higher, increases, the engine will move out of its battery charging mode and begin delivering power straight to the wheels. Again, sometimes in unison with the electric motor. The battery is constantly being charged by both the engine and the car's brakes. Once consumers wanted more environmentally friendly hybrids, a plug-in hybrid was brought to market by most manufacturers. These hybrids work in a similar fashion, but in a plug-in hybrid, the battery is much bigger and can supply more power to the wheels. This also means that in order for the car to keep the battery charged efficiently, it requires regenerative braking, the engine generator, and plug-in charging to keep the battery at full charge. As it is still a hybrid, the owner doesn't have to charge it, but it's just best for efficiency that the battery be kept up. The biggest advantage of all with a plug-in hybrid is that the battery-only range is much better than a standard hybrid. When comparing the standard Prius to the RAV4 Prime plug-in, the RAV4 can go 68 kilometers on battery alone, while the Prius only manages 40. For a lot of people, that extra 28 kilometers of range opens up a hybrid for their daily commute, making it possible for them to drive to work without even starting the engine. We've established that there are a lot of different solutions, but none of them work for absolutely every transportation problem we have. So the question is, which is best for what use? I'll explain in depth the different areas in which these technologies are especially useful, in the cities, in the suburbs, and in rural areas. There are tens of millions of different Canadians who need to use transportation, public, private, no matter what the technology. Almost 74% of these Canadians live in largely populated cities. Along with high transportation needs, cities provide a lot of opportunities to try out new concepts and technologies. The positives also come with their own share of issues. When considering what technologies are best for cities, there are a lot of things that must be considered to provide stable and reliable infrastructure for a massive and constantly changing city. When looking for a versatile and eco-friendly power source for all transport vehicles on the road, transit buses and cars alike, there's a big comparison being made between hydrogen vehicles and electric vehicles. Surrounding both the cars themselves and the infrastructure needed to support them. The biggest roadblock facing fuel cell vehicles is that the cost is significantly higher than a battery EV, since the advantage of a fuel cell's range doesn't make a large difference in a city. It's not worth the extra cost. Given that cities in Canada are getting more and more expensive to live in, that's a major issue. Since the commute distance for people in a city like Vancouver is quite short, with the median only being 7.4 kilometers, cars like the Nissan Leaf will do just fine for most commuters in Vancouver, even with just 120 kilometers of range. Consider the value a commuter gets from a used Nissan Leaf compared to Toyota Mirai. You can get a used Leaf for about $15,000 to $20,000 Canadian dollars. Certainly not the cheapest, but a lot less than a $50,000 Toyota Mirai. The other major roadblock standing in the way is the infrastructure required to make it work. Unlike setting up EV chargers, which already have a power grid, hydrogen would either be transported through natural gas pipelines, which aren't exactly built in many cities, or by truck, further increasing the traffic sprawl. EV charging takes up a lot less space than hydrogen fueling stations as well. While hydrogen could work very well in cities in the near future, it'll be quite a bit more difficult to put in place as long as battery electric vehicles are around. EVs are getting smaller and more efficient. Cars like the Renault Zoe and Fiat 500e have been excelling in the European market. We could very soon see these catch on in North American cities, with gas prices pushing people further towards EVs. The suburbs are free of a lot of the roadblocks faced by cities when it comes to transportation systems. They aren't very densely populated, but are still in close proximity to the resources needed to power eco-friendly transportation. The extra space helps make new ideas easier to implement, creating an environment that I think hydrogen in its early stages will flourish in. Families in the suburbs almost always have longer commutes than those in cities, from taking the kids to school, going to work and back, with a grocery trip and soccer practice in between. A suburban family car tends to be a big, heavy, and durable one, for good reason. A hydrogen car can easily provide this. That's not where the advantages of a hydrogen car end for suburban areas. Alongside the 2008 lease-only rollout of Honda's FCV into the suburbs of America, The Honda home refueling system made its debut. This box in your garage was able to produce blue hydrogen for the Honda FCV using natural gas and produce electricity for the home it's plugged into. This system tapped into the home's natural gas supply, helping with the lack of stations. Overall, hydrogen vehicles provide added conveniences when compared to EVs, and with personal garages everywhere, the issue of refueling stations is reduced. Suburbs with more undeveloped land, space for new infrastructure, have space for new infrastructure. This is another area where transportation infrastructure. There is another area where transportation infrastructure is often forgotten. If you're looking for a difficult infrastructure challenge, look no further than trying to make environmentally friendly transportation work in rural areas. A place where it's far too sparsely populated to make a bus or rail system work, where the landowners are as stubborn as can be, and nobody likes change all that much, and everyone is about 50 miles away from what they need to get to. For EVs to make sense, there needs to be small-scale chargers almost everywhere. The issue is that there isn't power everywhere, and even if there was, it wouldn't be able to support an EV charging network. There have been plenty of ideas for solving this problem. Simply upgrading the power grids in these areas has been brought up. Considering that most rural areas tend to get a lot of sunlight, solar-powered solutions are an interesting fix, but not nearly as affordable and convenient for rural areas as hydrogen. Rural areas already have the infrastructure to transport fuel, whether in a pipeline or on a truck. Gasoline is already the all-round solution for many rural communities, supplying electrical power for houses and fuel for cars. By replacing home diesel generators with fuel cells, electricity can be transported to homes but with a truck or a pipeline carrying hydrogen gas. While setting up an environmentally friendly transportation network is going to be a very long and difficult journey, hydrogen's all-round replacement solution could work very well for these communities. It's all a part of stopping global warming, and forgetting an entire subset of the population doesn't help our long-term goals. We can't forget about the importance of trucking and the different technologies being proposed to eliminate its carbon footprint. Almost all of the previously mentioned technologies can be used to create a zero-emissions trucking industry. It's essential that we reduce or eliminate the emissions caused by this sector, as a diesel truck produces the same amount of carbon in a year as 14 road cars would in the same period. Multiple solutions have been presented to solve this problem. Let's start with the most well-known solution, a fully electric truck. This is the route that most of the truck manufacturers have gone down, like Freightliner with their e-Cascadia, Tesla's Semi, and Volvo's electric range. The trucks that contribute the most carbon emissions are semis, and it's probably what came to mind when I mentioned trucking. Electric trucks can provide the same power and torque as a diesel one, and can haul the same cargo. Semis are long-haul trucks. They're made to cover massive distances and remain on the road for very long periods. These needs are what electric trucks are struggling to match diesel trucks at. While these trucks may charge a lot faster than the average EV, filling the massive truck battery to 80% in 90 minutes, that's still not matching the refueling times, obviously, of a diesel truck. And with a range of only 370 kilometers, drivers will be stopping for charging breaks multiple times a day. In a diesel truck, the driver only has to stop every 1.5 driving days. There's a solution to this problem, and it comes in the form of a fuel cell range extender. A truck equipped with a fuel cell range extender has a fuel cell charging the batteries while it's driving, but never powers the wheels directly. This means that as long as there's hydrogen fuel cell on board, and it's kept running through short fueling stops, the battery will never lose its charge. Renault sells fuel cell extended light-duty cargo vans that would otherwise have an electric range of only 80 miles. When done right, public transportation can improve both the environment and quality of life for everyone in the city. There's very little point in investing in technologies that take time and funding to research if they're only going to be enjoyed by a few. Public transport is the best possible way to get everybody traveling sustainably. If your public transport service is poor, there will be more cars on the road, therefore causing more pollution. In the average American city, there's only 1.5 people in each car on average. This means that a large articulated bus can replace 80 to 100 cars on the road while full. A city with a well-designed transit system allows for every citizen to be able to access the network of routes, whether they live in the suburbs or downtown, while at the same time making the city less noisy and helping improve the quality of air, and in turn, improving the quality of life. It makes the city much cheaper to live in, with gas prices reaching the levels they are now. Let's take a look at a city that does very well. In North America, if you want to find an eco-friendly and efficient example of a well-planned transit system, look no further than Vancouver. With a fleet of over 1,600 buses, Translink has been running diesel-electric buses for over a decade now, with a type dominating their fleet. Although this is a great help in reducing transport emissions in Vancouver, TransLink is beginning to put into service battery electric buses that can use 100% electric power. At the moment, only 4 of these buses are in service, but TransLink plans to put 15 more into service later this year. This time, these buses will be a new generation of the ones currently in service. The buses in service currently only have a range of about 40 kilometers, with lengthy charging stops in between trips. This new generation allows for 150 kilometers of range and is compatible with a new charging system. This new charging system is placed at major stops, where it connects to the top of the bus and can top up the batteries in the 5 to 6 minutes while passengers board. There are also some much bigger projects on the way for TransLink. They're mostly focusing on the expansion and upgrading of the SkyTrain system. Everything from an entirely new subway line underneath West Broadway, along with a proposed line to UBC in the future. This will significantly decrease the load on Vancouver's busiest bus route, the 99B line. They're also planning to expand the Expo and Millennium line, adding plenty of new cars. Vancouver's transit may not have the most trains or the most buses, but it serves a massive population in a relatively eco-friendly manner. It's a rare occurrence that a major city in Canada or the US does so well to serve so many with public transportation. When I started writing my paper, I wasn't asking a question. I thought I already knew just about everything on the topic of eco-friendly transportation future, and that I was just informing those who didn't have the knowledge I did. After all my research and writing, I realized that I was the one asking the questions, that the issue of providing environmentally friendly, equitable, and efficient transportation to everyone is a far deeper issue than I thought. It also highlights how massive our climate crisis is, not just the repercussions of warming oceans, but all the different ways of handling it. In this presentation, I only skimmed the very tip of the transportation iceberg, one that's only getting deeper and deeper. What's even more stunning is that this isn't the only iceberg to be explored in the sea of climate change solutions. Solving all the issues in my paper, with all the solutions I've talked about, only removes 27% of emissions. There's still 73% left to fix. Across the industries of electricity production, manufacturing, commercial and residential emissions, and agriculture. Climate change is an endless problem with an ever-increasing list of solutions. If we fail to use them, though, our world and everyone on it will be forced to endure endless hurt. All year I've been worried that I would run out of time, but my issues have been rooted in more not running out. I want to learn about so much more, whether that's the technologies developed in motorsport, or the structural safety design I talked to a retired GM structural engineer about in an RV park. There's no end to what you can discover when you do an assignment like this, and I have quite a few people to thank for that. Pam, thank you for keeping me on track this whole time and giving your time generously to my project. Thank you, Jen, for coordinating the entire program. None of us would have completed this project if it weren't for you. Trust me. Thank you, Sean and Miles, my external advisors, for all your advice, everything from the facts to editing. You guys really helped me with this project and kept me motivated. Thank you to Terry, of course. For donating your time, precious time out of your retirement to talk to me about all sorts of car models, inside information about GM's EV processes. That really helped keep me motivated and keep going with my paper. And thank you, Mom and Dad. Mom, you told me at the start of this project that eventually I would be thanking you for all the articles you sent to my Gmail. And yes, thank you, Mom. I could say at least 50% of this project was read articles from my mom. And thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad, for your always wonderful editing advice. And I think that's it. So just step up.
That was incredible, Mr. Cane-Osborne. So we are now going to have our question period. We're going to start with the questions from the advisors, from Pam, but also the external advisors have sent in questions that she will read. And then we'll have questions from the floor. Please do not line up to ask your questions until the first advisors have asked theirs. Of course, family, you get priority too, so you can ask some questions, especially you, Madeline, as a little sister. So, over to Pam.
Mr. Cane-Osborne, I'm so impressed. You have come a long way from your beginning ideas to this polished presentation. I must say the font. Can you comment on the font? Because I know you're quite proud of that font too in the presentation.
You may have noticed, I'm sure none of you noticed actually. It's the font that's used on the London underground system. So basically, like, that usually says underground on it, but I just photoshopped that to say future transportation.
Very clever, very clever.
Yeah, very happy.
So my first question comes from Miles. Both your advisors are sorry they couldn't be here. Miles has an interesting question. He said, this project helped you define where you want to go with your... Oh, has this project helped you define where you want to go with your career and interests? What other skills has this process helped you develop?
Yeah, I think you partially answered that question for me. Yes, this has really sparked my interest. I never knew, as I said in my conclusion, I never knew how deep the issue and all the solutions goes. Like, the whole time when I was writing, I would write a section and be like, that's a lot of information. Nobody's going to want to read that. And then I do some more research to find something else that's more interesting. Turns out it just goes deeper. So, and that's even discounting all the confidential stuff that's going on. Like, it's a very secretive business at the moment, especially because all of this is on the line. Just think about how so much profit can be made of jumping on a technology that works. So no secrets are being let out about it. So it's a difficult research process, but yeah, it's definitely pointed me in the direction of wanting to do this as a career.
Right on, interesting. And so the other question was, what skills did you gain from this project?
Well, I certainly learned how to edit a lot better. My dad always says there's no good writers, there's only good editors. And reading over my paper, I can certainly say that from my first edit to my second edit, every time I edit it over, I'm like, either why did I write that in the first place? Why didn't I edit that out the first time? Why didn't edit that out the second time? So yeah, it taught me how to keep my writing more concise, because I tend to obsess over adding detail, because that's what's always gotten me good marks. So yeah, but like at times it's just saying the same sentence twice but different wording. Like that's definitely what I've learned to cut out.
Excellent. So it kind of ties into my question for you. Oh, well, of course, I have three. My first one is related to that, is when you started this project, your goal was to talk about hydrogen as the fuel of the future, or the solution to climate change. And you ended up with a much broader and very interesting, I have to say, but a broader analysis of multiple solutions. So what made you change your direction?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
Mostly because when I looked into hydrogen and I started writing and like formatting out my sort of sketching out my paper, I discovered that there's a lot of things with hydrogen that need to be put in perspective. As with all technologies, because you can't just say it has very good range. What compared to what? It has the fueling is not very available compared to what, right? So, and I had a lot of previous knowledge about EVs and stuff. Obviously not enough, but to make a Masterworks. But looking over, it's just so much needed context. So I had to add that stuff. Yeah.
So it's not that you think hydrogen is not a solution, it's just that it's more complicated, right?
Yeah, there's no one size fits all for this. There's going to be very mixed features.
All right, my second question. When some people think of hydrogen, they remember those high school demos, or videos in our case, of the hydrogen balloon and the crazy science teacher exploding the hydrogen, and there's fire everywhere.
Or Hindenburg.
And a lot of people in Hindenburg, a lot of people associate hydrogen with fire and not bombs, hydrogen bombs. So can you comment on the scene?
So essentially the only risk of fire in a hydrogen vehicle that's more than a gas vehicle is the battery. The fuel cell and the hydrogen inside is less of a concern than with gasoline in tank. And while hydrogen maybe you can say it's far more flammable, but basically how it goes is so the U.S. military, it's a very interesting story, the U.S. military did a test of a gas, to try and convince people that hydrogen vehicles are safe. And they did a promotional thing where they got a Ford Escape that was gas, just a normal car, and then another Ford Escape which was hydrogen powered. And they stood at a distance and fired a sniper shot, for some reason, into the fuel cell and the hydrogen tank, and they also fired into the engine and the gas tank. What ended up happening with the, and by the way, this is a puncture of multiple systems, which doesn't really happen in normal road crashes, but it's just showing. The hydrogen vehicle, there was a bit of a flame in the back, but all the hydrogen escaped before it could ignite. It escaped out in the air, so it was sort of like a flamethrower coming out the side of the car. but nothing else burned because it wasn't the fire wasn't latching on anything and burning more. What ended up happening with the gas vehicle is it burnt to the ground, to nothing, because the gas, it'll break and it just spreads, and then that's just fuel for the whole car to burn. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that story too. And this last one is for you.
Okay.
Cars are your passion. I know you like to geek out with your advisors, talking about some of the cool electric cars, and anytime we talk about cars in class, you brighten up. And so it was probably hard for you not to write more about specific cars, and I can't believe you didn't even talk about a single race car.
I had a photo of one. I had a photo.
Yeah. But would you like to tell us about the coolest car that you learned about?
No. I always
One,
get this,
only one.
I
Only one
I
car.
always get this question all the time.
Non-Masterworks, Masterworks. That I discovered through this.
Well, just your favorite. What's your favorite car?
Okay,
Come on.
I'm going to make it specific to Masterworks.
Okay, yeah.
There was one that I discovered, a startup in Italy. If any of you remember BMW, you know those super micro cars? Like a human barely fits in one. It's so small. Like they have they have 2-stroke, 1-cylinder engines. They have 10 horsepower. They're really, really small.
Those are golf.
Essentially, there's a startup based in France and Italy that's doing they're using like the original design for the BMW Isetta, which is one of those. They nicknamed it the bubble car. They're putting electric batteries and electric motors and all that stuff in it, and it'll have, and according to them, it could have an extremely, like a crazy range for something that small, something like 200 kilometers for like a tiny little thing that I could jump over. Yeah.
And that's your favorite car.
That's my favorite one that I discovered.
Do you have a question, Jen?
Yeah, I do have a question. You looked obviously into transportation mostly with personal cars and also with long-range trucks. Did you look at all, and I bet you know somewhere in there, about planes and trains?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. My original plan was to do everything, but with hydrogen focus. So not all the solutions for planes, not all the solutions for trucking, not all the solutions for everything else. Just focus only on hydrogen for each sector. As soon as I searched hydrogen plane, went to Boeing's website, scrolled down, this is way too complicated to talk about. So I didn't end up doing planes. That was a pretty early decision not to. I actually talked with my uncle about plane emissions, and according to him, they actually have a much lighter impact compared to other vehicles because they transport more people. I don't know for sure.
Bioethanol.
Yeah, they have better fuel, I guess. Yeah. So, question from the floor then?
Yes, questions from the floor.
How about Gavin? Can I ask that question? Jen?
Madeline, you can speak first and then we'll go to your dad.
Mr. Cane-Osborne, what do you think is the best way to let people know about public transportation? Like people who might be unwilling.
I actually talked about this in my paper and I didn't mention it in the presentation because it was too long of a section. But I think removing the stigma around it is the biggest concern, especially for America. Here in Vancouver, that's significantly less prevalent because all the promotional material we see from TransLink, all the buses we see, they look very clean. They've got people on there, and like the stigma and the stereotype in the U.S. is that you're putting yourself at risk by going on a bus. That it's really sketchy, and there's people there who are low income, and you don't want to be with them, right? I think in American cities, that's the main blockade. I was talking about Houston in my paper. They have the best, the biggest, the best trains, the most trains. They got all this stuff. They spent so much money to make these trains and system really good. But they can't get people on them because everybody already either has a car and at the same time doesn't think they're safe on there. Yeah. So the best way is removing the stigma by talking about it.
David, go ahead.
Mr. Cane-Osborne, do you foresee the day when blue hydrogen allows fuel cell technology to outperform electrical technology in cars in terms of cost, performance, and environmental impact?
I could see that. I could see blue as a transition. Green is the zero, completely zero. Yes, green. Green, yeah, I could foresee that happening. Not a complete replacement. Kind of like what I was talking about the city. One of my advisors, Sean, he works in the hydrogen space, and he said that it was painful for him to say, but battery electric vehicles are much better in cities. They're more efficient, first of all. Far more efficient than a hydrogen vehicle in terms of energy. Both of them are far more efficient than a gas vehicle. Like something like 20% is the average gas car. So 20% of the thermal energy that goes in with the gasoline is 20% is actually used. But yeah, I could foresee that happening with green hydrogen, but only in certain areas. Like that could happen recently, soon. Matthias.
Hello, Mr. Cane-Osborne. I was wondering if you talked about like those buses in the city that like have the poles that go to the wires.
Yeah, those are I did talk about that. That's in my paper. Those are trolley buses. Those are the earliest electric buses. They've been around for so long. I was shocked to find out like they've been doing that since like the 20s. Trolley buses.
The 1920s.
Yeah, but those didn't have batteries, so if they got severed, no bus for you. Yeah.
Amazing presentation, Mr. Cane-Osborne.
Okay.
Are hydrogen fuel cells like built in, or are there separate ones?
Like in terms of, are they installed into a car, or are they built with the car? You're saying?
Yes.
It depends. You can like Loop Energy, the company that my advisor Sean works for. They develop fuel cells that can be taken out. Like they don't have to. They're like an all-around solution. Sort of like a generator is an all-around solution. That's their version, right? They can put those in buses. They can put out all this sort of stuff. In commuter cars, though, they can't be taken out. They're built in. Yeah.
And another one, with in the rural section, with the also just like the big semis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to have like a non-built-in hydrogen fuel cell that you could have multiple stored to increase the range?
That's. Did you do my Masterworks? Yeah, you're hitting right on the point. That is another thing I researched. Like in general, just interchangeable fuel cells and interchangeable batteries are very exciting. That is a technology that could take off. Yeah.
Amazing presentation. I'm just curious, do you think there could be a future of hydrogen-powered ferries or anything like that for transportation on water?
Yeah, it's I could see that happening for long haul. I haven't done much research, but like taking the principles of everything else in terms of like rural areas and cities compared to like short ferry trips. I think batteries will be best for like a Bowen ferry because loading time you could easily charge up a bit. I mean, the battery pack's very heavy, and But yeah, I think that could absolutely happen in the future, just for like longer voyages.
So, good presentation, fantastic presentation, Mr. Cane-Osborne. With green hydrogen production, where you use renewable energy to separate hydrogen from oxygen from water, how would that compare to just using that energy to power cars or to charge batteries, instead of separating hydrogen from water and then putting it back together to make energy?
Right. The main cost of that is in efficiency in terms of energy. It's not in efficiency in terms of CO2. It's not emitting. You could go very specific and talk about trucks transporting, but if you're kind of avoiding that, the main loss is in efficiency because you're obviously losing that energy when you split things and put them back together. So that's the main inefficiency. Electric would be more efficient, but most people don't really care about the thermal efficiency of their vehicle. Like most people, like if you drive a truck, your car has a very poor thermal efficiency, 10%, 5%. That's insane. 95% of the power is gone. So if we're comparing from solution to solution now and in the future, it's much better. But if you're pitting it against battery, it is less efficient. But we'll see how much that matters in the future, I guess.
Is it about the range thing?
Range too, and convenience for owners. Yeah.
Well done, Mr. Cane-Osborne. Very informational. I had no idea a lot about all of this. But what is your favorite type of transportation or car that you've mentioned here today?
Okay, the ones I actually mentioned. I think the Toyota Mirai is pretty cool. It looks cool. The Toyota Mirai. It's I think it's actually just a few slides over. No. Yeah, there. So that's the older one. That's the older one right there. But yeah, F1 cars are pretty cool. Yeah, I guess that's your answer, F1.
Great job, Mr. Cane-Osborne. I was a bit skeptical at first. I was like, but
thank you.
it went great. I was wondering, you said that the average amount of people in a car in Vancouver per day is 1.5 people.
Yeah, America.
Does that mean a child, or the average is between 2 and 1, or a lot of people have half of a body?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could consult Jen on a bit of on averages, but yeah, 1.5 people. It's just I don't think they include. It's probably just.
Between 1 and 2. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, for sure. Thanks for your question.
Really, really good job. I was wondering what inspired you to do this project.
Well, but yeah, I love cars, and I've always been waiting to do a big project, something to do with cars. I knew that I couldn't do a full motorsport one. That would be so lame. But yeah, I was just excited about it. I looked at all my options. Looked at more maybe some sort of medical stuff. It's cool, but it isn't pushing me to get it done sort of thing. Cool, right? It's my most I'm most motivated by just cars. They go fast and stuff.
Great job, Mr. Cane-Osborne. One question is, I was wondering, since you said that Vancouver, it's really very eco-friendly, is the BC transportation, do they use more electric vehicles and
BC
hybrid
Transit,
vehicles,
yeah.
right?
They used to run hydrogen buses in Whistler. I think that program was decommissioned, but I didn't really study their fleet all that much. I know that because they operate in a lot of rural areas. Actually, they operate in Prince George. They operate in Prince all these different places that don't have infrastructure for electric. So I'd say in the areas that they do have those opportunities, I think they do have more electric vehicles.
And how do electric batteries and stuff compare to, let's say, gas batteries for more heavier vehicles,
Weight.
like cargo planes or something like that?
Cargo and vehicles, since the vehicles are already very heavy, you're not worrying about safety when it comes to that. But that's absolutely true. Semis won't be able to haul the same, they won't be legal to haul the same load. They have enough power and torque, and they're not too heavy to be able to pull it, but you can't have a multiple thousand-pound overweight truck on the highway, just for safety purposes. So they would be transporting lighter loads. It's actually the same reason why, if you've ever been to Europe, you might notice the trucks on the road have a flat face on them. They're not kind of like a bus, right? A completely flat front end. You might think, well, all the air is hitting the front, that must make them inefficient. The length, because they're not as long, it actually allows them to carry more cargo, and in the end, it's more efficient. So yeah, it's just efficiency will probably be better with hydrogen, because hydrogen fuel cells are lighter, but there's still a battery on board, so yeah, it's again, very complicated.
My turn, this is the last question.
Okay. Your presentation was amazing. It was so in-depth, and you talked a lot about different types of cars and stuff that I didn't even know existed.
I know either.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned, I can't remember what it was, but it was some type of car holds about 1.5 people.
Yeah. Yeah, I averages 3 and 1 or 3 and something. I don't know. It's just an average. So if you take there's on average 3 people in one car, and one person ends at 1.5, I guess.
I was slightly confused. I was like, half a person?
Yeah, I remember when I was your age, I got confused by that too. Very confused.
Don't worry, you got 3 more years of math.